So I'll just let everyone settle into their seats. I'd like to firstly thank everyone for coming tonight. Last month, someone at one of the lectures, someone asked me, why do you always thank us for coming? So I said, because everyone that comes, 99% of the people that come here live here. And live not literally in this building, but they live within the environment of Melbourne. And the more people that come through this place for the lectures and the programs that we're doing, then the higher chance that the community that my kids are going to grow up in is going to be a wonderful place. So I say thank you for coming, not for selfless reasons, but for very selfish reasons. I thank you for coming, and I thank you for getting on board with what we're trying to achieve, which is a healthier, a more well-living community, and a more mindful and spiritual community, as broad a term as you want community to be. So tonight's program is actually an opening program, which means if you have questions, well, at the end of tonight's talk, you'll be able to ask Mark a number of questions until we decide, well, that's enough. We're not going to take any questions during the program. But I want to point out that tonight is the launch of what is actually 3 weeks of mindfulness application. So for those of you who were with us last term, we ran 9 weeks on mindfulness, and it was very much theory with personal application. And what we're now doing over the next 3 weeks, as described in this very good-looking brochure, is actually different methods of applying mindfulness. These are 3 further talks after tonight so that you can actually become creative in your own application. Because ultimately this isn't about, oh yes, I do mindfulness meditation for 20 minutes every day, but the other 23 hours and 40 minutes of the day, I'm not particularly present. We'd rather that you don't do any mindfulness meditation, but you do live mindfully, which you might ask, how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to discuss that over the series. And we have to give a very big thanks. And in a moment, I'm going to ask everyone to give thanks through the gesture of applause to the Slonim and Nussbaum families for making this series available. It's through their generosity and through the contributions of everyone throughout the year that allows us to continue making these programs as available as is humanly possible without charge, so that we can continue to do the work that we're trying to achieve here in the community. So let's begin. And let's begin with dispelling all fears and myths. Who here does meditation on a regular basis, meaning multiple times a week? Who doesn't? Yes, there we are, the silent majority. And who here would say, yes, they're living in a mindful manner? And raise your hands if you feel, no, I don't know if that's me. And who here feels guilt because of this word mindfulness? Okay, that's it. And who here is too embarrassed to raise their hands for any of the questions? So what we're trying to achieve tonight is walking a road. Mindfulness means many different things to many different people. And the different interpretations of this word are actually all correct. Because you will find that this is a generic word that comes across in different cultures and traditions that often speak a different language, as in they don't speak English. And they're often giving over a very important message about how we're living our life in the most whole state as possible. Mindfulness is not about a 20-minute exercise. Mindfulness is not about just the way you eat, or just the way you walk, or just this or just that. It's an approach. It's an approach to living. And so what we're very privileged to have tonight is the series beginning with Mark, with Professor Mark Cohen. And the reason why that's a privilege is because Mark has been lecturing here for many, many years. And the feedback of his particular lectures are that they are the most holistically enriching. We often will have speakers who will speak about a particular area in life, and people enjoy that. But the feedback has always been that Mark takes a very holistic approach, and everyone is able to take the message and apply it in a way that is actually able to start tonight. able to start tomorrow. And that's why we've kicked off the series with Mark. So I'm not telling you what he's going to talk about. I'm not telling you how he's going to talk about. I don't even want to take up any more of his time, because we actually have come to learn from what I believe to be one of Australia's leading researchers, one of the most practical, pragmatic teachers. One thing that I will point out is Mark never comes in a suit and tie. Never, ever. And I actually think that's a really good thing, because what we're trying to achieve tonight and what we're trying to achieve over the course of this series is actually a really sleeves rolled up method to living. So without any further ado, Professor Mark Cohen.
Well, thank you for that very kind and warm introduction, and thank you all for coming. And thank you, I think it was Label, I have to thank Label again for the topic. As mentioned, I've been lecturing here many, many years, and each year Label actually gives me the topic, and I then have to turn my content into the suggested topic, and I always really enjoy that. Because if I have my own topic, I just talk about the same things over and over again. And actually, can I just have a show of hands? Who have heard me speak here before? Okay, not so many. So because there's some basic content I always like to deliver, and to try and rediscover that content in different ways is really enjoyable for me. So today I'm talking about, well, this is the topic: entry mindful and exit mindful, and how to deal with intrusive thoughts and hurtful feelings. And this has a lot of personal and practical relevance to me, and I wanted to make it a bit of a, I don't want to rely too heavily on my PowerPoint presentation. I want to, rather talk and dialogue with you, and at the end we can have some questions and, have a discussion about it. But I wanted to take you through some of the key points that I feel are important in this area, and then we can talk it through. So just start with the thought of the day that most smiles are started with another smile. So I'd like to kick you off. And just on that, just by doing that, there's a saying that people will forget what you told them, and they'll forget what you said, but they won't forget how you made them feel. So I want you to feel good. And actually, by feeling good, you're actually turning on your frontal lobe. You're actually activating your mind, your body's settling in. There's a whole neurotransmitter release. There's a whole hormone cascade that's happening in your body. It's just when you smile and feel good. And that actually will help you remember what I've said. It'll make you feel better, but also that will create a ripple effect out. You go out into the community, and then you'll create other smiles, and then this has a whole community effect. So I like to start that way. Thank you. And you may or may not have seen this slide. Mindful or mindful. What is the difference here? And what I'm going to suggest to you today is that thinking is really overrated. And that's coming from a professor, an academic, a doctor who I spend my days, working, in front of a computer, working with thoughts, and writing and publishing and reviewing, and I'm very much in my mind in most of my professional life. But thinking itself never happens in the present. Thinking is always about the future or about the past. When you're in the present, you have this state of mindfulness where your thoughts or what's going on in your mind is actually totally in tune with what's happening in your body. And in some regards, they talk about the being at one with your mind and your body and your breath. And the word for that in Sanskrit is actually yoga. Yoga, union. Being yoked, to have your mind and your body and your breath yoked together at one. So you're, if you're on the right side, if you're the dog, the breath, the mind and the body are all totally congruous. Whereas when you're thinking, your body's not with you. You're leaving it behind somewhere. So this process of mindfulness, and there's a lot of research now, a lot of talk now about mindful meditation, or mindfulness in chronic disease, mindfulness in chronic pain. There's a lot of research literature on the medical applications of mindfulness because it's really effective for people with chronic pain, with chronic disease, post-surgery, with depression, with cancer. Mindfulness is really powerful. But the power is not just in attaining a point of stillness where you've said your mantra, or you've listened to the birds, or you've tuned into your breath and you're finding this point of stillness. The power is harnessing your body, your breath, and your mind all together. And that doesn't have to be in a meditation. And I would suggest any time when you're totally engaged in what you're doing, when you're losing track of time, when you've lost track of time, when you've actually lost your sense of self, these are mindful moments. And some people get that sewing. Some people get it reading a book. Some people get it playing cards or walking the dog or drawing dragons or whatever your hobby is, whatever you love to do, that when you do it, you don't have any spare capacity to think about the past or worry about the future. You're totally doing it, but it involves your body. So whether it's guiding a thing from a sewing machine, or I did that recently. I just bought a sewing machine. I hadn't had one for ages, and I was sewing and realised 3 hours later, wow, I've just spent 3 hours and it just went, just repairing clothes. So it doesn't matter what it is. To have an activity that when you do it, you lose track of time, that can be your mindful meditation. You don't have to sit in lotus position and chant or do anything weird or wonderful. It's just being totally in tune with your body. So that's I want to start with that premise. And I want to also now just tell you a bit of a story. I've adapted this story. It's actually a traditional story with quite a few different cultures. And I've adapted it when my boys were growing up, as they're growing up. And it's a story about a man who lived with his son at the edge of a village. And this man had a beautiful mare. And in the village there were some very kind, considerate villagers who always thought about other people. And they said to the man, "We think it's really good that you've got a beautiful mare, because a mare is valuable and owning a mare makes you rich." And in the village there were also some selfish, mean-spirited villagers who said to the man, "We think it's bad that you've got a beautiful mare, because it makes you better and richer than us." And the man said, "Look, I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it's bad. All I know is I've got a beautiful mare." And the man's boy said, "I think I'm going to ride the beautiful mare." And you know what? The boy rode the mare all day. He just loved taking the mare out through the forest and through the fields, and he spent all his time grooming the mare and feeding her and looking after her. And he just loved that mare more than anything else in the world. And the boy thought he was totally blessed because he had a beautiful mare. And then one day the mare ran away. And the kind, considerate villagers said to the man, "We think it's bad that the mare ran away, because now you're no longer rich." And the mean, selfish villagers said, "We think it's good that the mare ran away, because now you're just as poor as we are." And the man said, "I don't know if it's good or bad. All I know is the mare ran away." And the boy said, "You know what? I think I'll play with the other boys now." And the boys started playing with the other boys, and he'd never played with them before. He was always with the mare. And he realised that he loved playing with making friends in the village and playing with the other boys. And they made up adventure games and fantasy worlds and told jokes. And the boy just realised he loved hanging out with his friends and playing games more than anything else in the world. And the boy thought he was totally blessed because the mare had run away. And then one day the mare came back. And following the mare were 6 wild stallions. And the mare trotted up into the horse corral. The 6 stallions followed it. The man came up behind him and shut the gate. And suddenly the man had a mare and 6 stallions. And the kind, considerate villagers who always thought about other people said, "We think it's so wonderful you've got the mare and 6 stallions, because now you're the richest person in the whole district." And the mean-spirited, selfish villagers said, "We think it's terrible that you've got this mare and 6 stallions, because now you're so much better than us that we can't even come near your wealth." And the man said, "I don't know if it's good or bad. All I know is I've got a mare and 6 stallions." And the boy said, "I'm going to ride those stallions." And the boy he just loved getting on the back and taming the stallions and bending them to his will and feeling their muscles under him and riding through, full gallop through the forests. And he just felt this power that he'd never felt with the mare before under these 6 stallions. He just thought he just realised he loved riding these stallions more than anything else in the world. And he thought he was totally blessed that he now had this mare and 6 stallions. Until one day he was riding the biggest and wildest of the stallions and galloping through the forest, and he fell and broke his leg. And of course the kind, considerate villagers said, "We think it's really bad that you've fallen and broken your leg because now you can't ride." And the selfish villagers said, "We think it's really good that you broke your leg because now you learn to suffer just like we do." And the man said, "I don't know if it's good or bad that my boy broke his leg. All I know is he's got a broken leg." And the boy said, "I think I'll have to stay at home and study with my father now." And he'd never had time before to study with his father because he was always riding the mare or playing with his friends. So now he stayed at home with his leg up and he started reading and studying with his father. And they read fiction and philosophy and poetry. And the boy realised he just loved learning more than anything else in the world. And the boy thought he was just so blessed that he'd broken his leg. And then a war broke out. And all the other village boys got taken off to war. Except the boy with a broken leg couldn't go. So the kind, considerate villagers said, "We think it's so good that you've broken your leg and you can get to stay home because now you're not in danger." And the mean-spirited, selfish villagers said, "We think it's really bad that you can't go to war because now you're not fighting and defending us and fighting the cause." And the man said, "I don't know if it's good or bad. All I know is my boy's staying home." And the boy said, "I think I'll hang out with the village girls now." Okay, and the story continues and continues. You can imagine what goes on there. So I just wanted to bring that up because in that story, it really shows, and that is a traditional story, though I added the boy. Normally the boy's not part of that story. But it just shows that, whether you're thinking about other people or thinking about yourself, if you're always in that situation, whatever happens in the outside world, things will be either good or bad. So that's the village perspective. The man's perspective is he just knows what is. He doesn't put a value on it. He just sees what is in the world and accepts what is. Whereas the boy's perception is he just makes the best out of any situation. And out of every single situation, he felt totally blessed. And all of those perspectives are available to us in any situation. So it's a nice story to think about. No matter what happens, we have choices how we can put our perspective on that. And just knowing we have a choice gives us power over our thoughts and gives us power over our circumstances. So there's this idea about being positive. I mean, that boy was very positive. He broke his leg, he studied, he lost his mare, he played with the boys. He found the best out of any situation. And the idea about being positive is that our positive emotions actually give us a compass, or actually all of our emotions provide a compass. So the positive emotions tell us the direction we should be going, whereas our negative emotions point out, this is where I've got an opportunity to learn or to heal or to grow. So if we tap into our emotions, it's not trying to overcome our emotions with a mindful state where we can, something's troubling us, so we can just, meditate and achieve mindfulness and still our mind, and then it's all okay. We need to go into our emotions, work out, am I feeling really good or really bad? And either way, it gives us a focus of what direction then we can direct our life. So our emotions become a very powerful compass of how to live our life. And in that also, I've spoken about this a lot over the years, there are two ways of thinking about a situation. You can think about the world as being separate from yourself, and that people are out to get you. People are out to get your money. They're out to take advantage of you. They want to take either advantage of you financially or sexually, or just use you to manipulate you to their advantage. Most of the world has that idea, and it's like the belief the universe is plotting against you. It's paranoia. It's based on fear and separation. Most people think that's the default way to be. And they've never considered that there's a totally opposite way to be, which is pronoia. And that's the belief that the whole universe is plotting to make you happy. And that there's nothing you can do about it. Whatever happens, things are plotting to make you happy, just like that boy. You know, who thought, that the mare running away would make him happy, or that breaking his leg would make him happy? But he had pronoia, that the whole universe was plotting to make him happy. That's based on love and connection. The idea that we're not separate from the rest of the universe, and that we can take control and take power over any situation. And that's, again, knowing that you have that choice, that they're both valid positions, is really powerful. Now, I just want to say that the universe is not plotting to hurt you. And the universe is not plotting to help you either. The universe just is. So either pronoia and paranoia are delusional. But what I'm suggesting here is you can consciously choose your delusion. If you're going to be delusional, you may as well consciously choose your delusion and choose the one that's going to be the most advantage to you. And I must say, it's much more fun living in the deluded world of pronoia, where you think things are out to help you. And it ends up making a self-fulfilling prophecy. You think that things are out to help you, you end up looking and finding the advantage in it. You think that things are out to help you, you're like the boy. Wow, I've got a broken leg, I can study now. Oh, my bear's gone, I can play with my friends now. So, by having that idea that this event is, here for my benefit, you actually find the benefit. In fact, you create it. Because we actually create our own circumstances, we create our own lives. Just like we're paranoid and we think everything's out to get us, we create the circumstances where we prove ourselves right. See, they were out to get me because I got robbed, or I got this bad thing happened. So that's how we set ourselves up for intrusive and hurtful thoughts. But we have a choice. So as I say, if we're going to be in our mind, ideally we're mindful, we're not in our mind at all. We're in our body, and our breath and our mind are all together. But if we're going to be in our mind and interpret the world and put meaning on it, we can choose what meaning we want to put onto it. And in that choice comes the power of being human, the power of having choice. And I think this is just knowing this, that for every negative thought, there's at least one equally powerful and equally valid positive thought. In fact, there's probably 10. But we have to create them. They're not out there, waiting to be discovered. We actually have to create that. So whenever you've got a negative situation or a negative thought, you say, what is the equally powerful and equally valid positive thought? And the way you know when you found it is that when you hold both the negative thought and the positive thought in your mind, you feel at peace. You can use your emotions. And when something terrible has happened, you have to really search for this equally powerful and equally valid positive thought. But when you found it, you can actually just be at peace. You're not controlled by that negative emotion, that negative thought anymore. And it takes it's a bit of a mental discipline. It's a bit of a practice of getting control over our thoughts, realising that we've got this ruminating negative thought going on, this anxiety, this negative feeling that's dragging us down. And once we've recognised that, we can say, hey, I'm deluding myself. What's the balancing delusion I can have that I can actually be at peace? So I think that's a really powerful exercise that you can do on almost a daily, hourly, minutely, yearly, monthly basis. Whenever you're felt pulled or oppressed by strong emotions, we can realise, hey, we've created the situation, we can create the opposing situation. So there was some research done that said, laughter is the best medicine. Giggling is good for mild infections, chuckling works for minor cuts and bruises, and snickering only makes things worse. So we've known that, laughter is the best medicine. It's talked about, but being positive, focusing on the positive, what we do have in life, becomes a really powerful drive for how we live a joyous life. And that's, talking about mindfulness, we get to choose what we fill our mind with. So what do you want to fill your mind with? You can either be mindful and you fill your mind with whatever's coming through the senses. You're like the dog. You're in the moment, totally in the present. You're not actually thinking. You're just sensing and you're in tune with what's going on right in that present moment. But if you're going to fill your mind with thoughts, we can choose it. And there's this idea, Viktor Frankl talks about it in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. But, we can focus on the carrots or we can focus on the stick. There's a stick behind us and there's a carrot in front of us. Which are you going to focus on? And Viktor Frankl says life can be pulled by goals just as surely as it can be pushed by drives. And the thing is, if you're running towards the carrot, running as fast as you can towards the positive things you've created, that's the best way to avoid the stick. If you're looking over your shoulder while you're running forward, that actually slows you down, knowing there's a stick behind you. So you're better off just to be aware that there's a stick behind you and then forget about the stick totally. I mean, you're not saying that the stick doesn't exist. You're not saying bad things don't happen. You're just saying that you can't get any advantage. The best thing you can do in life is no bad things happen, but actually focus on the good things and run towards them, rather than looking over your shoulder and being scared of the stick and working out how big the stick is and how many spikes are on it and how close it is to you. All that's going to do is slow you down going towards your goals. So again, it's up to us to realise, hey, I've spent a lot of time looking behind over my shoulder at that big stick, that big dark cloud that's looming over me, rather than imagining the silver lining that I can be running to. So pronoia and paranoia, we can think the universe is helping us or hurting us, and it's so much more joyous to think the universe is helping us. And if you think about it, most babies have pronoia. To a baby, the whole world is there just to feed them, to bathe them, to toilet them, to entertain them, and to love them. Now, not every baby, there's child abuse is a real thing, and not every child has a beautiful upbringing. But what I'm suggesting is it's never too late to have a happy childhood. We've all got that inner child, that's still with us. And we can create a world where the whole world is there to feed and bathe and play and toilet and entertain and love us. And that becomes a really powerful drive. We fill our minds with that expectation of love, that expectation that things are going to work out well, that expectation that whatever happens, there's an absolute treasure at the outside. And they've done studies on this. They did an analysis of women with breast cancer. And I don't want to talk too much today about research, but this is a really interesting study where they got women to write an essay about their breast cancer. And the topic of the essay was, what was the effect of breast cancer on your life? And then they went through the essays, and whenever the breast cancer was mentioned, they replaced it by the event. And then they took the essays to some literary professors or assessors, and they asked them to grade how good or bad they think the event was on this person's life. And what do you think they found? It's about 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, 8 out of 10. But they all regarded the event, based on what the women had written about their breast cancer, as being an incredibly positive influence on their life. Because when they'd wrote about it, they'd wrote about how it heightened their senses and it increased their personal relationships. It made them think more about themselves and others and what they can contribute to the world. And generally, the breast cancer had, even though there was some pain and there was some surgery involved, but the breast cancer was a really powerful, positive event in these women's lives. Now, you wouldn't want to wish breast cancer on anybody. But in terms of the effect on these women's lives in this study, it was actually seen as a very powerfully positive event. So it's just, we can't predict and we can't control necessarily the events that happen to us, but we can control our reaction to them. And just knowing we have that control, which means it's okay to be devastated and to be in grief and to have all these negative emotions. That's fine, but we need to be real to them. If they're there, we need to actually feel them and express them. But it doesn't mean that they have to totally control us and overtake us. We actually have the power to balance them. So this guy's got a special hearing aid. It filters out criticism and amplifies compliments. There's a whole lot of research on this too. It says that we actually need a 3-to-1 ratio, that normally our minds are tuned in to hear criticisms, and the criticisms are amplified 3 times, and the compliments are downgraded. So when people talk to us, we've got these big antennae that are out there for criticisms, and in one tiny criticism, our antennas start ringing and we hear that. Yet we ignore compliments. And Barbara Fredrickson's a positive psychology researcher. She talks about the 3-to-1 ratio. And she explains it really well, I think, using the analogy of a yacht. That the positive things in our life, the compliments are like the sail above the water. There's 3 parts above the water. And the negative things are like the keel below the water. Now you need something, you can't have your whole life being positive, because then you don't have a keel and you just sort of go any direction, and it's like you've got no direction or no focus. You need to be aware of the negativity in the world, but you need 3 times as much positive sayings. And this is with relationships. If you're going to criticise someone, give them 3 times as many compliments and then criticise them. And then they'll use that criticism to help steer their life, like the keel. But if you just criticise someone with no sail, you're just going to weigh them down, and they're not going to be able to go forward. They need 3 times as many positive than negative effects. So we all need these sort of hearing aids. We need to amplify compliments. We need to minimise or just filter out the criticisms, or at least have that 3-to-1 ratio. So this great, one of my great mentors, people I really value his input. He's no longer with us, Joseph Campbell. He says, follow your bliss. And if you focus on the blissors, the stressors become less relevant. Or to find a place inside you where there's joy, and the joy will burn out the pain. And he says, when you follow your bliss, the universe will open doors for you where there were only walls. And when we follow our bliss, that's our internal compass. I talked about our emotions being a compass of where we're going to direct our life and which way we're going to go. Well, bliss is a really powerful compass. And when we follow that, we're being true to our own inner self. And then we're also being true to expressing who we are in the world without trying to imitate someone else or impress someone else. We're just doing it for ourselves, because bliss is its own reward. You don't experience bliss so someone will say, "Oh, that was really good bliss you just experienced." You don't do it to get approval. You don't do it to for any external, I got so much more bliss. It's not a competitive thing. You experience bliss because that's its own reward. So that's the universe, your relationship with the universe, with Hashem, as you want to feel it, that you're doing the right thing. You're being fully who you are. And when you do that, the universe nurtures you. Pronoia becomes part of your daily life. You sort of expect, obviously there's a car spot wherever I want to go that just opens up for me. And it's obvious that, that things will line up so my travel plans just all happen. Obviously I'll see my long lost friend here, and then things just happen and fall into place. And then you have these antennas for things like that, and they happen even more. So there's some sort of basic tenets of, how to counter intrusive thoughts and block, and hurtful feelings. Well, we all have intrusive thoughts and hurtful feelings. It's not like to beat ourselves up for them, but just to know that they're part of life. We create them, and we can create their balance, their counter. Now I wanted to just we've got a little bit of time. What time are we supposed to go till? We got some time. So all night. Because I wanted to tell you a bit about because a lot of people, when they think about mindfulness, they think about mindfulness meditation and being in stillness. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about my journey through the 5 elements, or through the what's now we'll call the 5 rhythms. And it started off when I first studied medicine. I studied Western medicine, then I did physiology and psychology, and I studied Chinese medicine. And this is in the mid-1980s. And I came across this sort of diagram, and it's basically 5-element theory. And there's lots of different depictions of this, but in Chinese medicine, they divide the whole world into these. In the West, we call them 5 elements. If you look at the original Chinese translation, it's the 5 phases of transformation. So the 5 ways that things move and change. And it's metal, water, wood, fire, earth. And they classify pretty much everything in the body and everything in the universe according to metal, water, wood, fire, earth. So each of the hollow organs and each of the solid organs and each of the tissue types and each of the emotions and the sense organs and the seasons and the different types of food and the different colours are all related to these 5 elements in Chinese medicine. And they talk about a constructive cycle where fire creates earth and earth creates metal, metal creates wood, water creates wood, etc. And a controlling cycle where fire will control metal, metal will control wood, wood controls earth, earth controls water, etc. And there's a whole relationship there. So when I studied Chinese medicine, it just made a lot of sense to me that these relationships were there and they're solid. And they also gave a map of the emotions because the emotions were mapped to these 5 elements. And then in the 1990s, I came across a martial art called Panchatan Mantra, which was the only martial art I'd ever found and was actually taught here in Melbourne. But it was a Shaolin martial art. It was from a Chinese sort of heritage, but it was based on Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. And it was a martial art that was based on these 5 elements fully. And each of the elements had 1, 2 or 3 different moves. And the moves could be done very slowly. And then it was like a Tai Chi, like a meditation. And that would increase the energy in those meridians in that type of element. Or you could do it very fast and it became like a block or a punch, like a martial art. And that was releasing the energy. So with each of these elements, when you understood that they all had an emotion related to them, and that if you had that emotion, you could increase the energy of that emotion, or you could release that emotion. It became a very powerful healing art as well as a martial art. And I practiced that for 10, 15 years. And then more recently, in the last sort of decade, I've come across the 5 rhythms. And this was founded by Gabrielle Roth, who was a movement therapist, dance therapist, body worker in Esselen in the 1970s. And she observed in nature there were 5 major rhythms: flowing, staccato, chaos, lyrical, and stillness. And that all natural transformations went through these 5 rhythms. And each of them had an emotion. And it's really interesting to me because there's quite a big global 5 rhythms community. And they talk about the 5 rhythms, and Gabrielle Roth has a fantastic book called Maps to Ecstasy. And her book talks about the 5 rhythms and how they're related to the emotions. But they don't make the relationship with Chinese medicine and the 5 elements. But yet they're very strongly related. And you're related through those different emotions. And I've just got up here the emotions for each of those rhythms. And there's what they call a light and a shadow emotion. So for flowing, the shadow is fear, and to counter fear is faith or trust. So you can either be really fearful or you can be faithful. You can be scared something's going to happen, or you can trust that things are going to work out right. And I'm not going to go through actually we'll talk a bit about the relationship with the rhythms. But that's one balance. And then for staccato, it's about anger and forgiveness. Something happens, you can be really angry. If something bad happens, you can be really angry about it, or you can forgive. Chaos is about grief and gratitude. So if something bad happens, you can be really sad, or grief and relief. Relief and gratitude are related. You can either be sad it happened, or you can be grateful for what's happened, or you can be relieved about what's happened. Similarly with lyrical, hatred and joy, stillness, apathy and compassion. You can not care, or you can be really compassionate. So with each of these emotions, if you feel yourself in any one of these emotions, You can then go to the counter emotion, but you can also realise that you're part of a flow of 5 rhythms, that you're actually going to flow through all of them. And if you stay in any one of those rhythms for a while, it naturally progresses to the next one. So the 5 rhythms becomes a metaphor for how life works, life itself works. And I can take you through some of the maps of the 5 rhythms, and I keep on having different sort of insights into things that seem obvious in hindsight, but how these 5 rhythms manifest in our lives, but also through human evolution or through the development of our lifespan. And one of the ones I had recently is just, five is a pretty, if you look at the human body, 5 is a pretty obvious thing. When you put up our hand, we've got 5 fingers, yeah? And in fact, we've got 10 fingers, and they're paired. So, they're the emotions. You've got 5 basic emotions, but they're paired. There's a mirror image for each one. And not that fear is bad. And it's not like your left hand is bad and your right hand is good, but they're counted. But if you think about, and this is something that came to me, because when I was studying medicine, we learnt about the fingers. We did anatomy. And each of the fingers has a Latin name. I don't know if you know this. A lot of people don't. And the Latin name of your fingers is related to the holes where you stick them. So, yeah. So, the thumb is called oris. Fits in the mouth. Fits in the oral cavity. That's oris. This one's nasalis. This one's rectalis. It's the rude finger, yeah? Rectalis. This one's annularis. That's where you put a ring on. The ring shows you're married or shows what guild you belong to. And this one is auricularis. Fits in the ear. So I sort of knew that when I was studying medicine, but then I thought, how do they relate to the 5 rhythms? There must be a relationship here. And then I thought, okay, I started using Chinese medicine, thinking about the little finger. Auricularis in Chinese medicine is the ear is related to water element, and water is related to flowing. So then I thought, that the little finger, if you move and are guided by your little finger, the type of movements you come up with are sort of more flowing movements. You see how my little finger's directing the movements of my hand? I'm leading with my little finger. That's very flowing. If I'm going to start moving and show you movements from my ring finger, it's more like, look at my ring. See? I'm showing you my ring finger. It's very staccato. Staccato is about, flowing's about continual movement. Staccato is about boundaries, about definitions. Then, if I'm going to lead my whole hand moving from my tall finger, my rectalis, it's like shaking my hand. My tall finger now is leading the whole thing. This is chaos, shaking the whole hand. If I move with my index finger, it's like conducting an orchestra, doing writing. It's lyrical. It's very creative. You can actually create anything in lyrical. And if I'm going to be led by moving my thumb, it's like, It's stillness. So we have an example here of flowing, staccato, chaos, lyrical, and stillness, right on the end of our arms. So that's the metaphor of how the rhythms move through our lives. And that sort of gives you an idea of the character or the nature of the rhythm. So flowing is continual movement, staccato is stop and start, defined. Chaos is release, letting go. Lyrical, index finger is creativity, writing, joy, sort of bit silly. And the thumb is stillness, which is about compassion. It went through the emotions, apathy, compassion, being in stillness. So that's to give you a flavour if you haven't moved from it. And I'm still a very keen student of 5 rhythms, and I do a practice. And Melbourne's got quite a big 5 rhythms community, and you can dance probably 3 or 4, 5 nights a week, 5 rhythms classes. And there's no set movements, and there's no particular age or any particular demographic that you need to be, because it's just free movement. And they call they do in a five rhythms class is they move you through the flowing, staccato, chaos, lyrical, and stillness, and they call that a wave. And you move through a wave, and flowing naturally becomes, after a while you flow for a while, it naturally then starts becoming backwards and forwards, and becomes staccato, and then staccato after a while becomes sort of chaos, and then chaos after a while breaks up and becomes lyrical, and then lyrical after a while slows down and becomes stillness. And you can do that, you can do a wave in, I just did that with my hand in a minute or less, but in a class it might be an hour and a half where you move through a wave. And what occurred to me that often when we talk about mindfulness, we're thinking about stillness. But being mindful that these rhythms are all around us, they're part of our life, they're expressed in our own body. And to know that each of these rhythms are associated with one of these emotions. So if I'm in anger, I'm in very much, stop, start, defining. But I can still do that, or I can be in forgiveness. But then that stop and stuff, anger can actually move into grief. And grief can go to hatred, hatred to apathy, but grief can go to gratitude, and gratitude can go to joy, and from joy you get compassion. So you have this natural movement of the rhythms, but the emotions can go through our life. And there's a lot of different metaphors. So looking at the top thing there's a bit of a map there, but if you look at the evolution of life itself, life itself started in the oceans as flowing. And the body parts are related in the five rhythms. So flowing is related with the feet. So, and then staccato is the hips, chaos is the head, lyrical is the hands, and compassion or stillness is the breath. But if you look at life on Earth, it started in the oceans, then it went to the land, and we started walking. That's staccato. So, fish are very fluid, flowing. We went to the land, it was very staccato, backwards and forwards. Then from the land, from the reptiles, we went into the air. Birds is chaos, release, and movement in the air is very chaotic. Then mammals were created. Mammals evolved, and they can live anywhere. They're lyrical. They can go in the air and in the oceans and on the land. And then humans evolved, and we're stillness. We can go anywhere we want because we've got houses, and we can just be still in any environment. We can adapt to any environment because we can control the whole environment. So that's the evolution of life. And then if we look at conception, the act of conception where you have foreplay is flowing. We have thrusting, pelvic thrusting is staccato. We have orgasm as the release of chaos. We have the afterglow of lyrical, and then communion, and resting as stillness. And in birth, literally, the fluids break, the water breaks, and you have flowing. Then you have the uterine contractions as staccato, backwards and forwards, until the head gets released, and that's chaos, the release of energy. The head comes out. And then the body's born, and you literally have lyrical, the first breath. And then from lyrical, the first breath, you have suckling and bonding, which is stillness. So it's from conception to birth. And then throughout our life, infants are naturally flowing. They drool and they leak, and their consciousness is very fluid and flowing. And then, for childhood, it's staccato, backwards and forward, when they're first learning to say no and really define their world. And then adolescence is chaos. It just is. We're not children, but we're not adults, and we don't know what to do. We're looking for approval, but chaos is adolescence. And then adulthood is lyrical, where we get to create and be involved in the world. And then old age is stillness. And Gabrielle talks about infancy is our relationship with the mother, childhood is a relationship with the father, adolescence is a relationship with our peers, adulthood is our relationship with the world, the community, and old age is our relationship with the universe. So they're the rhythms as they move through our lives. And even in basic human connection, the most basic form of connecting someone is literally to wave at them. You use your feet to get close enough to wave at them and say, hello, I exist. Or hello, I acknowledge that you exist. So we wave. And then, once you've got an agreement, when you've defined something, staccato, you shake hands. backwards and forwards, coming from the hip, shaking hands. We've actually agreed on something. You're you and I'm me, and we've done a deal, and we're going to agree to not kill each other. And we're going to agree to work out something to do together. And then you actually do something together, and what do? High five. The high five's, the release of the experience. You're actually in the moment. It's sort of chaotic, but there's that release in the moment of high five. And then after you've done that, you can have hand signs, and hand signs can create anything. Once you've got hand signs, you can create this and that. You can, no matter what you can imagine, you can create it together. And finally, so that's lyrical, and then finally, you have a hug. You share that common bond with us. So again, that's just the manifestation of these 5 rhythms that they appear in our lives. You want to think about it, having a dinner party. You're making the arrangements and working out the menu. It sort of flows until people start to arrive, and it's staccato, and things are coming in. Hats, jackets are going up here, and people defining where they're going to sit and what's going to go on, and then chaos, it all gets released. We're a bit chaotic, where people are trying to find their chairs and what's going on, and then lyrical, it's you're in the party, you're talking, everyone's having a good time, and then everyone leaves and you have stillness. So it's just a natural flow that happens of these rhythms that naturally flow through our lives. We could talk a bit more about some of these, but I just wanted to give you a taste that these rhythms are always there. The emotions that we're experiencing, once you realise they're related to a rhythm, and then that rhythm has its own counter emotion, but also that will naturally progress into the next rhythm. So you're not stuck in it. You don't have to be stuck in any one rhythm. We actually naturally flow through them. And just knowing that is really powerful. Knowing that we don't have to be controlled by our thoughts and emotions. There's also an analogy with surfing. My brother's a big wave surfer. But if we think about the different positions you can have on a wave, you can be out here just flowing with the ocean, just rising and going up and down with the ocean, you're flowing around. Or you can, staccato would be paddling, very backwards and forwards thing, it's repetitive, it goes on. And you can either be paddling out into the wave to try and paddle over it, or you can be paddling with the wave. And either way you can try and paddle against it, or you paddle with it. And if you're paddling with the wave actually picks you up. And even though you think you're paddling forward, you're actually getting sucked backwards for a while as you're being lifted up, until you have the point of chaos, which is the release of energy, when you actually fall down the face of the wave. So taking the drop is chaos. And lyrical is riding the face of the wave. You can carve your the different shapes on the wave. And then stillness is either you can drop into the tube and just be still, or you can flick off the wave or come back onto the shore. So again, there's the analogy there. And there's an even stronger one with all of human evolution. If we think about 50,000 years ago, we were hunter-gatherers. And we used our feet, and we used speech as our communication. We didn't have writing, we just used speech, and we lived in tribes. And that got the human population to about 1 million people. And 5,000 years ago, so a bit more, we created agriculture. In agriculture, we used our hips, we dug in the earth, we built walled cities, very staccato. We started using writing, so again, it defined our communication into letters and specific writing. And we had, rather than being associated with tribes, we were associated with particular religious groups. And that got us to tens of millions of people on Earth. And then about 500 years ago, we had the industrial age. So the agriculture age was staccato. The industrial age was chaos. We started broadcasting information. We started using fossil fuels, first coal and then petrol. We started being associated with nations and created the First and Second World Wars. So, there was literally a chaotic situation. And we got to hundreds of millions of people. Then, about 50 years ago, after the Second World War, we had this post-industrial age. We had this explosion of creativity. We had computers, we had feminism, we had human rights. We had ideologies rather than nations or religions or tribes as what we associated with. And that got to the human population to billions. And right now, over the last, just over 5 years, we've had, a lot of the world connected through social networks. We have networking as a main form of communication, and we're starting to think ourselves as not being just associated with an ideology or a religion or a nation or a tribe, but with the whole planet. And all the pundits say, we're going to reach about 10 billion people on the planet. We're not going to get much more than that, but that could be a stable number, 10 billion, and a stable number could also be 0. There's a lot of happening around the world now that we could actually hit 0 people if we have another world war or epidemics or devastating pollution and climate change, etc. But if all goes well, we can reach 10 billion, and that's the age of stillness. So this is the 5 rhythms manifest through all of human evolution. So I just wanted to give you that perspective. In Chinese medicine, they talk about the macrocosm and the microcosm. And this is the macrocosm, and our lives are the microcosm. And I'd say, look, if you're not feeling overwhelmed at the moment, at least in some regard, you're not aware of what's going on. I mean, what's happening in the world at the moment is really overwhelming. So that's okay to be overwhelmed, but to know you're part of this whole transformation of what's happening globally, and that's also transforming inside us, and it's transforming through our own emotions. So when we're mindful of that, when we understand that what happens in our mind is, I won't say totally under our control, because there's stuff that happens that we're not in control of, but what we can be in control of is how we react to that. So if something happens in some devastating event or some horrible thought comes to us, we may not be in control of that event or that thought, but what we can be in control of is how we counter that, how we balance that, and how we move through that. And hopefully this gives you a bit of a map for navigating these thoughts and feelings, and to know that mindfulness isn't just about, as I say, not just about sitting still and meditating, it's about being aware of what's going on minute to minute, day to day, intrusive thought, hurtful thought, and then saying, oh, that thought's been around for a while, it's not really serving me. I've enjoyed being moping around for a while. A bit of self-pity was pretty fun for a little bit. It's okay to separate, but it's not actually serving me now. What thought can I create to balance that? And then just checking into yourself and saying, what am I going to fill my mind with? And that's the choice. So being mindful, and as I say, there's many definitions of what mindfulness is. But what I'm suggesting to you tonight is that you can choose what you fill your mind with. And the choices are vast, but they generally fall into these patterns that are defined by the 5 rhythms. And for every negative, hurtful, shadow thought, there's a very nurturing, positive, bright thought that you can create for yourself. I might just leave that at there. Well, we've been going for a little bit of time. I'm very happy to have some questions and answers and discussion.
So we'll take 6 questions. So who has 1? We'll start 2, 3, 4. All right, we'll save the last.
Let it come up, yeah.
Yes. So we'll take the questions. Of course, we can't answer everything, but we're going to give it a shot, right? So we'll start with Hannah, number 1.
I just wanted to say how lovely it is to hear you again. I think I met you about 15 years ago at Professor Alvin Sally.
Yeah, sure.
And Swinburne University. Honestly, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
To say, to have seen you a few times and just to hear this is, everything is also stimulating, and this Chinese thing is just wonderful.
I don't think I've spoken about that before here.
No,
So
yeah. I'm just saying each time I hear you, it's just all new, wonderful stuff.
Thank
I just
you.
want to congratulate on you.
Thank you. It's not a question, but thank you.
We can take all those sorts of questions tonight. Number 2.
Do you believe that everything in life is based on love or fear?
Fear or love? Sure. Well, that first dichotomy, fear and faith. fear and love. I mean, love and faith and trust are all connected. So that's, yeah, you've always got that choice. You can be in fear or you can be in love. And love is faith and trust. That, you know, fear is paranoia, you're scared of something, or pronoia is love, where you embrace things. So sure, I think that's what I really believe, that there are always polarities. And you know, when you're truly mindful, you can actually step out of polarity. And this is again in Chinese medicine, they talk about yin and yang as the dominant polarity. So there's, you know, dark and light. And traditionally, yin and yang is the dark side of the mountain and the light side of the mountain. And our nervous system has, you know, the sympathetic nervous system, which is to, you know, fight or flight, which is countered by a parasympathetic nervous system, which is to rest and digest. So, you know, so they're the polarities. But there's also, in Chinese medicine, what they call the Tao. Or in Judaism, we have the Hashem, which is incomprehensible, which is beyond all polarities. Where when you are truly mindful, when you're totally in the present, you can transcend fear and love and just totally just be. But you can never describe it. It's not comprehensible and you can't put it into words. So you can have an experience of total oneness, which is beyond polarity, but to be able to be in your mind and to be able to talk, you need to evoke polarities and to invoke the past and the present. So yeah, fear and love, I certainly believe that that's always a constant choice. I do believe you can step outside of polarities and experience the great unity that's literally beyond comprehension. And they say that the Tao that can be spoken of is not the true Tao. If you can say it, you've limited it. It's beyond comprehension. And it's great to experience that. You can have a direct experience of it, but you can never communicate it. So that's where you follow your bliss. When you're in bliss, you can experience that.
Before we take number 3, it's an interesting idea that in Hebrew the word for revelation is gilui, which means revealing. You go, oh, revelation. But actually the word gilui is actually a stage of concealment. The very act of revelation or revealing yourself is an act of concealing what's really going on, because you can't give your thought over. So what you do is you break it down until you get a single point that you can transfer to another person. So revelation is concealment. Who was number 3? Right.
I was 2. Mark, I wanted to know, you were talking about practice of 5 rhythms on a regular basis and different classes which you go to as well. We were just also talking about describing the experiences is sometimes difficult. How would you describe the experiences of that practice which you take?
Well, each time I go into the practice, it's different.
Yeah.
And it's amazing because, like, I've been practicing it for 7 years now, a bit more, and I still discover new ways that my body can move. Like, there's a lot of other dance forms where they're quite regulated and you'll dance, but you're doing the same movements and maybe you get better and more adept and more automatic. With 5 rhythms, it's an ecstatic sort of spontaneous. Whatever you're feeling, you move it. And it's not choreographed, and there's no you can't do it wrong, and you can't do it. You just do what your body does. And I'm always amazed to discover, wow, I've never moved that way before. Or you'll dance with a partner, and male or female, a totally person you don't know, and you'll have this sort of physical communication through dance that you've never done before in your life. So it's very creative. It's very you approach it with a bit of curiosity of what's going to happen, and pretty much always for myself personally, when I go to a 5 rhythms class, I'll leave in a different state than when I came. But it's like anything, you'll get out of it what you put into it, and part of the challenge, but also the thrill and the beauty for me is to really be able to immerse myself in my own. They say, dance like no one's watching. So you have to just like. And I think Melbourne's a very supportive community because we have a 5 rhythms community where someone can be lying on the floor, rolling around, and other people can be jumping up and down, and like no one cares. It's like we're all. Although it's a very intimate and personal space too. So there's people I've been dancing with for years who I'll see every week and I'll dance with them, and sometimes very intimately, to have, intimate connection, and to be witnessed is very powerful. To be witnessed being your true self is really powerful, and to witness others is really powerful. But I don't even know their name. I've never spoken to these people, but I feel they're part of my community. And they share the same sentiment. You're really happy to see them, and but it's a different form of communication, which is a physical communication. And it's often there's a lot of intense emotions expressed in these 5 rhythms class. We've got great teachers here who can hold that. But you go through these emotions. So if someone's feeling grief, in chaos, they might really release that grief, and they might start yelling or crying, and that's accepted. And then knowing that once they've expressed that, they'll move from the chaos, the grief of whatever they're experiencing, and that'll move into lyrical, and there'll be a joyfulness that will come out. So yeah, it's a deep practice. But some people go there and they don't even go into the rhythms at all. They just go there and have a movement class. So it's as deep as you want to take it.
Who was number 4? Yeah, Eliezer.
You mentioned earlier in the talk that you can create your own circumstance, and then later in the talk you mentioned about inner childhood and conception. How does a child create his own circumstance when he's been born into?
No, what I was referring to, creating your own circumstances, creating the thoughts that are in your head. So knowing, so there might be something that happens that it's not in your control. But what is in your control, and this is not for an infant, this is for an adult with a mind that is conscious, you can consciously create a response. So, for example, if you're one of these, emotion pairs, that if you're really fearful, you can acknowledge that fear, but you can say, okay, what can I trust, or where can I find love, or where can I find faith in this situation that can counteract that fear? So that's how you create your response, is by finding the equally valid and equally powerful positive thought for any negative thought, and then knowing that you've got the balance between the two when you're at peace. So anytime you're not at peace, anytime you're feeling hurt or agitated, or you've got these thoughts that are intruding, the challenge that the power of consciousness is we can actually have a meta thought. We can look down at, because we are not our thought. We have thoughts, but we are not our thoughts. So we can have the thought, but once you realise we're having, isn't it interesting I'm having this particular thought? What other thought could I have instead of that? And then once you're having this metacognition about thinking about your thoughts, that's me being suffering, that's me in grief. What else could I do that'd be different? Where can I find, grief is relief, so maybe there's something about the situation I can be relieved at, even though I'm grieving. Maybe there's something about the situation I can be grateful for. My father just died, I'm grieving, but I can find gratitude in his life and all that he's given to me. So even in the grief, there's gratitude. And what we do is we create our circumstance, or we create our response by finding those different emotions.
It emerged. Before we take 5 and 6, I'm going to use this opportunity as a segue to point out on Monday nights we have our Transcendental Kabbalah class, and tomorrow night's class happens to be on understanding why we are not our thoughts. Thoughts are, as much as an action is something that we adopt, so are our thoughts, and we've been challenging what everyone often thinks is, no, I am my thoughts. So that might be something for people who found, what did Mark just say, of how Kabbalah approaches this idea of recognizing our thoughts and who we are as being two separate things, and often things that we adopt and bring on, as opposed to things that are naturally instinctive. So question number 5.
Question number 5 was earlier in the talk you said that the universe is not up to get you, or neither
up to help you, and whether things like that is pretty delusional. Don't you think that some of us are born into a little bit more welcoming world and welcoming universe than others? Don't you think that some of our religion is actually all about a little bit of luck, a little bit about the universe, a little bit about the helping end of, something up there? I don't believe it's delusional, actually.
Well, it's our thoughts that we create about it is the delusion. Our circumstance. Some people have wonderful circumstances and actually handle them really badly. And other people have terrible circumstances and handle them really well.
That's the sentence of our sages, and I only know how to say it in Hebrew, which is "Hakol tzafui v'shut metuna." But do you know? I don't know how to translate it, but it's like all in the universe is actually up there for us, but it's our approach is how to get the best out of it. But I still don't think that having a healthy universe or a destructive universe per person is delusional. I think it's really
What I'm trying to say is, if you think the world's out to hurt you, that's a destructive thought. The counter to that is the universe is out to help me. And when you have both of those as equally real, you can actually be at peace. And that's the point of where you go beyond duality. So by holding both of, the universe is out to hurt me and help me, well, they're both equal. Neither of them is more real than the other. And when neither is more real, then you can actually be at peace and transcend that particular duality that you were embedded in. So I think we do have a choice. And certainly, the little boy, he broke his leg, but is that good or bad? If you're the selfish village, it's...
Do we have a choice?
Absolutely. If you have a
choice.
If you have a conscious mind.
In some places of the world, there is no choice. We live now here in Melbourne, in our community, in Australia, in a non-third world country. We have a choice. We have to bless that choice. You
may say an infant who doesn't have a conscious mind, the ability to meta-think, doesn't have a choice. But if you've read Viktor Frankl, The Man's Search for Meaning, he was in a concentration camp, which is a terrible, terrible situation. And even in that most horrific situation, he had a choice over his own response and his own feeling. And that's it's an amazing book, Man's Search for Meaning. Man's Search for Meaning, I recommend it. But so and there's many, talk about Nelson Mandela being in prison for how many years? 27 years. He had a choice of his response to that. And so I do believe, and you need to have a conscious mind. If you're mentally disabled, if you're an infant and you can't, and it's a tragedy if 25,000 children will die today, mainly from malnutrition. They often don't have a choice, but they also don't have the ability for metacognition that we have to actually think about their thinking. So they're suffering, they're just in the suffering. Whereas we have the luxury about thinking about what we think
their
about.
mind is just mindful and we are mindful.
Yes, exactly, yeah. So, and if you've got this mind that's full of stuff, what I'm saying is we can choose, we can be the editor. We can edit what we're going to actually fill it up with.
Do we have a number? We have the number 6 there, we have it.
I have some trouble understanding when to passively accept what is and attempting to actively change that.
When do we passively accept what is or actively change it? Well, we're always changing things. And I would, again, use your emotions as a compass. If what is working for you, then you can accept it. But if it's not working for you, if something negative comes up, if you have any of these shadow emotions, and I don't like to call them negative because they actually they can have a really positive impact on our life if we recognise them and say, these are the areas that I'm stuck. These are the areas I need to grow or heal or work on or create another option. And we all get into ruts. We all get into patterns where the same things come up over and over again, and we seem to be in a rut. And it's like they're the areas of our life we need to learn from. So they're not negative. So say, who was it? Swami Beyondananda, he's a comedian. He says, life is like photography. You develop from the negatives. Although that was before digital photography, I guess. So, you need that little bit of negativity under the, in the yacht, to be the keel. But you need 3 times as much positivity above the water to guide you. So, I've used the emotions as a compass to say if it's working for me, if I'm guiding along, I've got 3, parts positive above the water and 1 little bit of negative down to keep me balanced, that's good. But if you're flipping over the place, you don't know where you're going, you lost direction, then that's when you need to sort of start to think, what can I change? So yeah, use the emotions as a compass.
So there might be a few more questions which we'll take after. Do you mind staying back for a few minutes? If I do escort Mark out, it's not him, it's me. You can blame me. But where to from here? So Tuesday night we begin now the 3 follow-ups. Mark has introduced us to the achievement, which is let's achieve that positive way of approaching our thoughts. Let us move through those different stages in any given day. But there is the question of how. We got some tonight, but how is actually something that will probably take 100 years for every person to develop. But we're looking to condense that into 3 one-hour sessions. So this Tuesday night's talk will be how are we actually going to attain a full day of mindful living? How do we? We don't want to sit and meditate necessarily all day. And as Mark pointed out, it's not actually about the meditation, it's about living in a certain way. The meditation is an assistant to help us do that. But how? So Tuesday night will be the first class on how we're going to do that. But I also want to talk about the 3rd class because Mark mentioned earlier in the presentation the importance of laughter. And interestingly, the last presenter of this series, Rosa Ben Moshe, is a laughter yoga practitioner, and she'll be using laughter in attaining a more mindful state of living. So I really hope everyone's going to be able to make it to all 3. Before we conclude, I'd like to present Mark with a gift. And they have to get bigger and bigger because every year we've got to... but this is a particularly special gift, and I don't normally say, oh, this is what it is. This is a recent reprint of a 250-year-old text, a Jewish text called the Tanya. And it is all about, it is the fundamental text in Hasidic spiritual approach to living, which is all about understanding and hearing the voices in our head that push us to be hedonistic and egocentric, and those that push us to be altruistic, and how to navigate them every moment of our life so that we can live with intention and know what is informing our decisions at any given time. So, Mark, I'd like you to have it. I'll test you on it next week. But thank you very much, So as I said, if anyone does have a question, please feel free to approach Mark. He'll stay back for a few minutes and then I will escort him out. I want to thank you all for coming and looking forward to seeing you tomorrow night or the next night. Good night.